So this morning, I want to spend a few minutes talking about how people who have siblings get along with their siblings. Now, this might be a little bit awkward for some of us. Some of us are actually sitting next to our siblings. And I guess I'm sorry, not sorry, that I'm going to ask you to think about something that might be a little bit awkward in the moment. And I assure you that I will not just be speaking of siblings. Some of us are only children. But I will be speaking about how a discussion of siblings can help us to face the world in hopefully a healthier way. The Torah, as we know, describes many siblings over the course of generations. And if I had to generalize, I would say that the way that siblings get along with each other is not great. Starting with Cain and Abel, we know that Cain, out of jealousy, actually murders his brother. Not something, God forbid, that I would ever recommend. And then, in subsequent generations, you have siblings who can't even live in the same household, Isaac and Ishmael, and Jacob and Esau. You have the sisters, Rachel and Leah, who are competitive for the love of Jacob and also competitive about having children, although they do achieve some reconciliation, as do the 12 sons of Jacob, who, though there is a great deal of tension throughout their lives, get to the point of reconciliation. Now, I bring this up this morning specifically because we have two siblings who seem to get along beautifully, and I'm speaking, of course, about Moses and Aaron. It seems that they respect each other. It seems that there is no resentment. And interestingly, when God says to Moses, "V'asita bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha lechavod ultifaret," make these beautiful clothes for your brother for his honor and for his glory, there is a commentator who centuries ago wondered if Moses was resentful. After all, I have to make these beautiful garments for my brother. What do I get to wear? And what this commentator said was, Kvodo shel Aharon hu kvodo shel Moshe, that the glory, the honor of Aaron was the glory and honor of Moses, meaning that Moses actually took pride and pleasure from his brother's accomplishments and from his brother's glory. However, it is not so simple. So even these two, we will see, behave toward each other in a way that there suggests that there is some underlying tension. So we'll be reading next week about the Egel Masecha, about the calf that the people told Aaron to make. And Moses later will say to Aaron, "Why did you listen to these people?" And he said, "Well, they overtook me, vayetze ha'egel hazeh," and this calf all of a sudden appeared. So one would imagine that Moses harbored a certain amount of ill will toward his brother. Arguably, he had the easier job. He had to stand with the people, lead them in worship. He didn't have to tell them when they were doing things wrong. He didn't have to get angry with them. And so presumably there is some resentment beneath the surface that emerges from time to time. And you will recall that much later in the Torah, Miriam and Aaron will say to Moses, "Why do you have such a special relationship with God? Isn't our relationship with God equally special?" So this is the part of the sermon where I get a little bit confessional. So I am the youngest of three. I have two older sisters. And when we were growing up, I've shared this before, they would call me the little prince. I decided to take that as a compliment for as long as I could, until it became clear to me that maybe there was something else that was going on. Now, my father, may he rest in peace, as he absorbed that my oldest sister became a physician, my middle sister became a psychologist, and I became a rabbi, he would brag to all of his friends that his 3 children covered body, mind, and soul. And I thought that that was pretty clever. And of course, we're 3 siblings, so we tried to think to ourselves, what does he really mean by that? What does he value more? Does he value the body or the mind or the soul? Who does he really think is doing the most important work in the world? But I give him credit for finding a way to help us all to feel special and to not feel like there was a hierarchy in terms of what we were doing. At the same time, as we continued to grow up, there were certain things beneath the surface that would occasionally emerge. And yet, at the same time, I believe that we have gotten to a place where we can actually appreciate each other's accomplishments, where we can draw a certain amount of pleasure from each other's pleasure. So where does this leave us? Now, again, I want this to go beyond the question of siblings. It doesn't really matter what our relationship with our siblings happens to be. Where this leaves us, I believe, is that we can always find reasons to be resentful towards other people. Always. They seem to be having an easier time with their lives than we seem to be having with ours. They seem to be accomplishing more than we seem to be accomplishing. There are always reasons to feel resentful, and I think we all know that resentment never really helps us. The great Maya Angelou, poet, she said about bitterness that when you are bitter about somebody else, it harms you much more than it harms the other person. Your bitterness usually has no impact on the other person. It eats away at your soul. So I would invite us, as we are interacting with people around us, siblings, not siblings, anyone, to recognize that resentment is just a part of being human. It's ridiculous to pretend that we don't have these feelings, but to see if perhaps in our actions we can embrace the celebratory rather than the resentful. There is a beautiful Jewish expression, mitoch shelo lishma bat lishma, which means you start out doing things and your heart isn't in it, but then your heart actually comes around. So somebody says to you, I just got a new job, and you say, Mazel Tov. Even if you're still looking for a job, even if you don't particularly like your work very much. Someone says to you, my child just got engaged, and you say, Mazel Tov. Even if possibly your own children haven't yet found that perfect someone. Saying Mazel Tov actually coaxes the part of us that might lean into resentment away from that and in towards a kind of celebration and a kind of welcome of the other person. The Torah is such a timeless and remarkable book because it is human, because it acknowledges us in our full complexity, and it speaks to us not as angels, but as people. And so we could do a lot worse for examples of what it means for 2 people to embrace each other and to lift each other up despite the imperfections beneath the surface than Moses and Aaron. And Moses, according to this beautiful interpretation, was able to look at Aaron's glory and say, that lifts me up. Was able to look at his tiferet, his glory, and say, that lifts me up. And I urge each of us to do what we can to recognize the beauty, the glory, the accomplishments of other people. I assure you, it will help lift you up, all of us up as well. Shabbat Shalom.